Okay, welcome to everyone on this session looking at the impacts of the environment on human health. I'm Gary Miller from Columbia University in New York City, and we have a session today. We'll have multiple speakers just give short remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So I want to start with the core topic of studying the environment and health, and that's this concept of the exposome. So the exposome is defined as the integrated compilation of the physical, chemical, biological, and psychosocial influences on biology and health. So it's a very holistic definition of our environment and how it impacts biological systems. And I also think it's very nice just to view it as the environmental complement to the genome. So when you think about all the non-genetic factors that impact biology and health, that's what we're trying to capture with the exposome. This is something that's been going through a lot of development over the last 20 years. We've held meetings at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories to focus on coming up with that definition at the top there. And there's several different meetings planned in the future at an international level. It's been growing in interest over the past many years, and I think this slide gives you a good, quick history of exposomics. So in 2005, Chris Wild, who was the director of the International Agency for Research on Cancer at World Health Organization, coined the term exposome. And for about 10 years, it really didn't go anywhere. But after that point, there was major investment from the European Union on several grants, and people started developing the tools to actually measure this. So you can imagine things like using mass spectrometry to measure things in people's blood, measuring things in our air and water, and trying to connect them to human health. And then over the past few years, we've really seen this sort of explosion of activity where I'm going to have to change how I do the slides because it's getting really compressed here when we look at 2024. But the European Union has funded an international consortium. I'll have Jana talk about IRENE, which is one of the S3 infrastructures focused on this area. But we've just really seen a lot of activity across the world. While it's been mostly focused in Europe and the United States, we're really seeing this quite a bit of activity over the past few years at multiple levels. And so just back in September, the National Institutes of Health funded this Nexus project for the network of exposomics in the US. So this is a national coordinating center to coordinate exposome research across all of the National Institutes of Health, whether it be the National Cancer Institute, National Institute of Aging, all the way across to coordinate all that activity. And so I lead this with my colleagues Chirag Patel at Harvard and Rima Habre at University of Southern California. But you can see that we have these various hubs supporting the activities of this coordinating center, looking at the administration, stakeholder engagement, the Analytical Sciences Hub, which is thinking about things like ring trials and how we measure these thousands and thousands of small molecules in biological samples, whether they be human blood or cerebral spinal fluid or tissue or from passive samplers or whatever it would be. We also have a very strong component in geospatial analysis. So thinking about looking at air pollution data or things you can get from all the things we'll hear more about today, but the idea is that if you know where someone lives and works, you can predict many of their exposures. And then the last part is that we're generating massive amounts of data. And so focusing on the data sciences and how we incorporate data coming across many different data streams. Like we're looking at multi-omic things, looking at this mass spectrometry kind of metabolomic type data, measuring the environmental chemicals, the drug metabolites, to looking at that geospatial data and trying to bring all those things together in a cohesive framework. And so this is really the National Institutes of Health first major initiative in supporting exposome research at a national level. And a big part of what we're trying to do is connect this at a global level. And so we're very interested in the infrastructure concept because we really need to work on getting this sort of intellectual harmonization on what we mean by exposomics and how we do it at a global scale. So fortunately, S3 has supported the IRENE project with Jana Klanova as the lead from Maastricht University. And so I will have her come up and tell us about that infrastructure effort that they're doing now. So, Jana.
Good afternoon. So as Gary said, the first European money went into the human exposome research already back in 2015. And pretty soon the scientists figured out that they can't really move with this research without starting building some kind of distributed infrastructure. Otherwise, you would start with something at the beginning of the project, finalize with certain tools, and then you start all over again during the next project. So already back then, in 2018, together with ICRI and European Commission, we identified a gap in the infrastructural roadmap because there was nothing on chemical exposures, nothing on the long-term studies of populations, nothing that would connect the environmental and health domain. Based on this gap identification, we developed the IRIN proposal. IRIN stands for European Research Infrastructure on Human Exposure Risk Assessment. And nowadays it connects 21 countries, including UK and US, to build the research infrastructure for human exposome. We are currently in the preparatory phase. So this is about the human exposome route of the IRIN infrastructure. But in Europe, we also have a second route because starting 2017, European Commission supported the joint program on human biomonitoring for Europe. That was much more policy-driven. They wanted to make sure that we have enough data about the chemical exposure of humans for the policy making. And again, within the 5 years of this project implementation, it became clear that if we develop the network of harmonized laboratories or the network of population studies, cohorts, toxicological laboratories, we need to preserve them for the future. So this became, the second community that was working towards establishment of the research infrastructure. 2 years ago, we initiated a follow-up project, which is the European Partnership on Risks Associated to Chemicals. It's called PART. And you can see that out of 7 work packages of this partnership, 2 of them are focused on research infrastructures. Because by then we already understood that within the 7 years of the project implementation, we have to systematically work towards identifying the infrastructural elements that would be preserved for the future, and they should feed into the future IRIN infrastructure. So what are the major pillars? Gary already said that we need to have some laboratory capacities, some data capacities. So we have 3 pillars that are related to the experimental. It's the laboratories that can measure chemical exposures, those that can measure effects of those exposures, means endogenous chemicals, those that can assess the toxicological hazards, that's ABC. But we also need to have some data support, so mobilize the environmental data or the samples where we can measure the new data, also the medical information, health records, samples from population studies and biobanks, and the most important, the tools and software packages that enable bringing the different data together. But the most important, because we are talking about distributed infrastructure, is really the harmonization. So a lot of work goes to the standardization and harmonization and bringing together existing capacities in different countries to really build enough capacity to assess millions of the samples. Because we would really align with the human exposome projects, measuring now millions of human genomes, and complement them with the environmental part. So very important for us is the standardization, multi-site harmonization, and we are already working in close collaboration with the US partners on the US-EU harmonization, but we were already able to apply those harmonized methods in several European cohorts and human exposome projects. Of course, this requires also building the data processing and data storage and computational capacities. We are trying to use existing infrastructures as much as we can. We are collaborating with the European EMBL and EBI Center in Kingston because they already developed significant capacities for the assessment of the human genome and also building different omics layers. So we hope that we can use them to also store, implement, and use the human exposome data. We are de novo building the data processing pipelines for non-target analysis of exposure and effect markers, and also building the tools connecting different environmental and health domains. So we are hoping that we will work closely with Elixir, with Galaxy community, and much of it is already happening. Many of our tools were already implemented in Galaxy. You can see some statistics of how much of them are being used. But I said that our work in Europe is also relevant for the policies, so we have to make sure that we are not only building the academic tools, but we are also building the data visualization and interpretation tools. We work very closely with the United Nations Environment Programme and WHO in building the visualization tools that make data more visible and understandable for the policymakers and the citizens. Thank you very much.
And so next up, we have Carthage Smith from OECD to discuss some of the policy implications and how we would take this knowledge of exposomics to a broader level. Carthage.
So I've been on a crash course on the exposome. I'm not an exposome expert at all, but this initiative does raise some interesting policy challenges that we don't necessarily have the solutions to yet, but I think that relate across the whole of this conference, which is about international infrastructures. I'm from the Global Science Forum, at OECD, and it used to be called the Mega Science Forum, and it was about exactly this, big global projects and how to do them. And all the policy in that context is how to enable and support these projects, how to enable these bottom-up initiatives to take off, to recognize which ones are important and provide the sort of support that they need. So in some ways, this is kind of a classic global coordination challenge. It's a little bit like the human genome in some ways. If we look back at the human genome, Europe, as we've heard, and the US have already, if you like, got their act together. But as we've heard across this conference, we need to move beyond Europe and the US, and we need to really be inclusive on these initiatives. This particular initiative about exposures, chemical exposures, environmental exposure. If you think of some of the countries that beyond Europe and the US, these are really critical issues that have huge health impacts. So how do we do that? So I've been involved in the past in several global initiatives. So the global change research programs and how did they do things? Well, they got support from the outset as well from the monitoring agencies. So it's about, this is beyond the research funders. In fact, interestingly here, we also have the intersection between the health research funders and the funders of other research who live in their own silos to some extent. It's also across different ministries, and it's not easy to coordinate the policy interests across different ministries. So how do you build that interdisciplinary community, not only of scientists, but also of sponsors and funders? And that's really not easy. But there are some examples where it's been done, as saying in global change. And one of the key things there was actually getting, in this case, I imagine it would be WHO on board. So you need some intergovernmental sponsor in some way to at least give it the legitimacy and a truly global organization. OECD, for something like this, actually is not global enough, I think. The other thing that comes to mind here is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which actually came out of an initiative from OECD. So GBIF, everyone tells me how important it is. G20 is releasing statements about GBIF. But when I talk to the people at GBIF, they're actually really struggling to get the funding that they need. And it's a tiny amount of funding. And we still haven't worked out at a policy level, at a funding level, how we provide, if you like, the essential glue money to coordinate these global initiatives. Or the essential, in the case of GBIF, what they do is they pull the data from lots of national nodes, and they help provide the standards and structure it all. And also GBIF now, historically, so they're biodiversity data. But actually, they find they have more and more users are coming from the health field, but they don't have any health ministries in their ownership. And so they're providing a lot of services now for the health community, but they're not getting any funding in. So how do you, again, this issue of how do you work across different silos between different funders and ministries? And then I think the final issue that struck me, and there's been a lot of discussion about it here, of course, is lots of this is about data. And it's about linking to data that's already out there, but also generating new data and in a way that is harmonized, but also from the outset that can be used by other communities, that is interoperable from the outset, if you like. And there have been discussions here about how to do that, but I think it means also connecting with the data community. So I think the ambition, the vision is fantastic, but there's lots of obstacles to get there. You know, in some ways, the structures, I think, coming from a lot of this, we heard about the European initiative. Europe has to some extent, built the structures and the mechanisms that can help this sort of thing to happen. They're still not there at a national level in many countries, and they're certainly not there at the global level. And what Europe has built works for Europe, but won't necessarily work globally. And so there's this real question of how do we link these things? You know, very structurally, how does an ERIC work with the US and with countries in the South, where they have different mechanisms and different restrictions on what they can do? So I don't have any answers. I can see the challenges, and I can see the vision. So I suppose, yeah, from the policy side, the question is how can we sort of support and enable this? And yep.
So next up, we have Charlotte Rome from the National Science Foundation. This is something I would admit right here is that the National Institutes of Health, where most of my funding has come from, isn't really big on infrastructures, and it's a challenge we have. You saw from yesterday's talk from Karthik about in the United States where the infrastructure money was. It's mainly from NSF, and I think this is a place where we haven't seen these partnerships as strong as they should be, and I think this is an opportunity to overcome some of that. So we'll have Charlotte address some of what's going on at NSF.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone for being here today. So it's an honor to be able to speak on this panel and also learn, I think, from this conference as we're moving forward on research infrastructures. So we heard yesterday in one of the opening sessions, regarding the recently released 2024 National Science Technology Council report on US research and development infrastructure. And the NSTC really prepares research and development strategies that coordinate across the federal agencies, and that's aimed at really accomplishing multiple national goals. And while agencies really plan and prioritize investments based on their needs through decadal studies, for example, that are run through the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, through workshops and other community planning efforts, the report really outlines multiple high-level opportunities that we can be thinking about across agencies, and these include strategic planning efforts to assess and prioritize investments and maintain and realize science and technology advances, sharing of research and research infrastructure strategies that really can help to identify gaps and catalyze new collaborations as well. Identifying gaps, as I just said, which can also lead to opportunities for new collaborations across federal, industrial, foundation, academic partners. And then finally, looking at benchmarking against international research infrastructures, which allows us to identify new international collaborations as well as enhancing existing partnerships that are out there. So NSF really supports cutting-edge research facilities and infrastructure that span across observatories, across ocean vessels, supercomputers, etc. And these are really funded through a suite of different programs that include the Major Research Instrumentation Program, the Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure Program, and then we have the large facilities. And through these research infrastructure investments, it's an ability to enable discovery and innovation by empowering scientists and the community at large to really explore, experiment, and sort of push those frontiers of new discoveries. Also looking to help researchers to address societal challenges and enhance training and workforce development opportunities through education and maintenance of a skilled, diverse, and sort of forward-looking workforce as well. So at the global level, really there are opportunities to bring together national and international efforts to help inform inclusive and holistic approaches. And in the context of the exposome, that I'm not an expert in either, I think there are opportunities here to really look at a holistic perspective, as we've heard from Jana and Gary and Carthage. The concept aims to capture the full spectrum of exposures, not focusing on one aspect. And so to achieve this really entails identifying gaps in current data and capabilities, data integration across different data sources and very diverse data sources that can include the environmental monitoring data, exposure data, biological samples, etc., as we've heard. And then also looking at multidisciplinary approaches that entails really bringing together researchers from various fields that need to come together to collaborate to effectively really study this complex interactions between the environmental exposures and public health. And so we know public health and environment are deeply connected, and within the context of the exposome, there still needs to be ability to explore and better understand what that role is of the environment to help improve the ability to address some of these impacts on human health. And observation and environmental monitoring RIs and networks can really provide critical data to monitor and predict factors that may impact human health, including, for example, early warning systems for disease outbreaks, looking at public health interventions from air quality, water quality, and climate-related risks, and therefore informing strategies to help understand and mitigate some of these human health risks. But collectively, by fostering collaborations and additional partnerships across agencies, etc., the gap between the human health studies and environmental data can really be addressed in a better way and allow advances in the exposome field. So I'm just going to talk quickly about one research infrastructure that we support at the National Science Foundation. We invest in several research infrastructures. And NEON is a continental scale observation facility that's really designed to collect long-term open access ecological data to better understand complexities in the Earth's ecosystem and predict and forecast changes, how they're changing. And it uses a suite of cutting-edge networks, instrumentation, observational sampling, archives for natural history, and sort of remote sensing approaches and technologies as well, to really collect standardized data on animals, plants, soils, nutrients across 81 terrestrial and aquatic sites that are distributed across the continental US. So this really allows the user community also to add sensors and measurements in addition to address more targeted questions through the research support services programs. So it's democratizing access to data, it's providing opportunities to help develop next generation workforce, and also increasing that discoverability through collaborations and partnerships with other networks that include, for example, Ameriflux, the National Microbiome Initiative, GBIF, as we just heard about as well. And so it really provides an opportunity to sort of transform this field by looking across scales from local to continental and from microbes to ecosystems. pardon me, just as we're sort of wrapping up here, we can think about data that's collected by NEON can really provide important insights, for example, into changes that are occurring. And this could be pathogens, it can be hosts and vectors that respond to changes in climate and land use. And utilize, for example, the over 500,000 samples and specimens that are deposited in the NEON biorepository to look a little bit historically at the current state of environment. So really integrating data collected and provided by environmental research infrastructures that predict changes in climate and possible spreads of pathogens, etc., can help inform strategies for mitigating human health risks by decreasing risk exposure. So I'll just finish up with an example of a collaboration and partnership. Many of you might have heard of this, and it's been discussed also in the context of this conference. As we think about scaling across global environmental research infrastructure, one example here is the collaboration and partnership that NEON is involved in with the Global Ecosystem Research Infrastructure, or GERI. And this, in 2020, was an MOU that was signed between 6 different continental scale ecosystem observing infrastructures from Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and North America. And it's really an integrated network of analogous but independent research infrastructures. And they're really dedicated to better understand how environments are changing globally and looking at integrating human and ecological dimensions and delivering harmonized data. So really the objective here is to foster these collaborations and information sharing among these networks, and also aiming to provide effective communication pathways between different countries and different cultures as well. So as I conclude, I think there is opportunity to leverage a large array of these environmental information that has been and continues to be collected and served through these environmental research infrastructures, both nationally and globally, to help inform some of these opportunities, to connect the environment to public health through, for example, advancements in new technologies and tools, harmonizing of data standards and management infrastructures, addressing spatial coverage gaps, and better understanding and how to predict and forecast potential exposures. And this will need to bring large partners together and efforts, be agency, foundations, and other groups as well. So thank you very much.
So next up, we have Joachim Müller, who hosted graciously a satellite event on Monday at his institution where we talked a lot about how these things would apply here. I think he's going to give a great example of why different countries have different needs, different exposures, and it's something that really you can't just have being done in Europe and the United States. So, Joachim.
Thank you. You know, forward. You know, sometimes I tell my students about that I wake up and I worry about the world in the sense that we are extremely lucky that we haven't really buggered up the world completely. And I really think about always the example of the CFCs. It was completely lucky that Crutzen found that CFCs make it up to the stratosphere and destroy the ozone layer. It's a completely harmless chemicals. Now, some of you may have heard of PFAS, which are the chemicals of the moment. And while we also all phase out PFAS, there is a whole industry that produces new PFAS because they need them for computer chips and car batteries and so on. What I'm saying is there's much more chemicals produced than we actually regulate and phase out. And that's why understanding the exposome is so important. Now I have a laureate fellowship from the ARC to work on the exposome, and it has been almost lucky in my career that Australia has not had much interest in human exposure. And there are many reasons why we have not been really interested. One of my oldest stories is that I tried to organize a breast milk sample collection in Australia, and I talked to the nursing mothers to whether they helped me collect breast milk samples 30 years ago. And then they said to me, and what happens if you find something in the breast milk? Now, in the whole rest of the world, people use breast milk sampling since 50 years to measure exposure in people and in babies. And in Australia, the nursing mothers seem to not know, the nursing mother organization seem to not know that breast milk is a good surrogate to measure the chemicals we are actually exposed to and that are in our body. Just shows that there was really no interest in it. So we think in Australia we are less exposed, and it was even forgotten in the National Health Measure Survey to put these samples aside and to look for them as an exposure thing. So that's a good example why we haven't done. So this void has formed the basis of my entire career. So I started with breast milk, I started blood sampling. We have all these programs, and we established an archiving program. And what I'm trying to say, and why we are so keen to host this side event, and why thanks Jana and Gary to come to this place, because it is really one of the right moments to bring Australia into this. Small country, small population, small country, not true, small population, yes. But it's really unique. It's got remoteness, it's got amazing senses, it's got a very broad coverage of climatic condition, it's got indigenous communities, it's got a lot that is really unique, where I think we can play a little role in this global effort for the exposome. And it's also the right time. When we write research grant applications, we always think, why now, why here, and why us? And it is the time when we form actually the coolest name of any government agency, the ACDC. So we just formed the ACDC a couple of weeks ago. We are struggling a little bit, if I read the news correctly, to form the Australian EPA. But it is really the place and the moment to bring these two together, because environment and human exposure are really one thing. And that's why we call it environmental health. And to bring it into this IRENE and Nexus and what all the world's exposomics spaces are, I think it will be a great idea. So I'm all for it at the end of my career. That's it from me.
So next up, we have Jan Rusak, who has been a key leader with the ICRI programs, and we wanted his insight for how we could actually do some of these things and some of the concerns. So, Jan?
Thank you for having me here. Yeah, I'm used to wear several hats, and when I look to this slide, you may ask yourself, what the hell is the guy doing here? Because, I mean, it's not at all related to the institute where I am still working on. It's more related to my exposure to research infrastructures. I have been in several reincarnations over the last 20 years engaged with research infrastructures, and therefore I am not so much even representing the ministry as it stands on my badge, but rather want to present you some thoughts as we have developed them over the years in ESFRI. Many things have been said already here at this conference about ESFRI, about ESFRI research infrastructures. IRENE is one of them. Many things have been said about ESFRI roadmaps, about the ESFRI landscaping exercise. And these two documents are tremendously important. They are even of fundamental importance for organizing European research landscape and aligning national infrastructure policies in Europe, but also increasingly beyond the European area. And in my short expose, I would like to convince you that ESFRI is doing a bit more than following strictly European research policies, and that we are doing a bit more than road mapping and landscaping. I have prepared a slide which looks very busy, and when looking to it today in the morning, I even realized that it has such a strange logics, which is even for me very difficult to follow, because it reads from the right bottom in a very strange way, but what it shows essentially is that in ESFRI we have been developing some ideas that are pretty much related to the things which Kartic was explaining. It's some considerations in the policy domain. And actually, I would like to start where Kartic ended and develop some thoughts as they came out over the last few years in ESFRI discussions about global research infrastructures, about transdisciplinary engagement, about the things how we can organize ourselves in order to provide, as it's written in the very last bottom, answers to global challenges. Because it's really important to understand that global challenges indeed require global solutions, and these global solutions require global collaboration. And this is very difficult to achieve under all the legal, financial, political, policy constraints as we are having it in the diversity of our environment. But nonetheless, in my short expose here, I would like to comment on two papers developed by ESFRI. One is a report that we have created, and it's called Long-Term Sustainability of Research Infrastructures. And within this strategic document, we have been tackling several issues related mainly to sustainability of research infrastructures, but also covering, let's say, the global dimension to that. And I have selected several of the 37 recommendations which were in this paper, and I think they are relevant to the topics we are discussing here. As you know, ESFRI is providing strategic advice on the entire policy domain to our masters, to the research ministers in the member state, associated countries, and the Commission. And a part of the mentioned landscaping and road mapping documents, we are also sometimes coming on our own initiatives to papers which we then try to sell to our policy masters. So what are the findings? For research infrastructures, it is really uttermost important that scientific excellence of the services is maintained. And this somehow also guarantees that there is sufficient social relevance of the supported research. And this is really the important prerequisite for, let's say, the sustainability of research infrastructures. It is also important that one has rightly considered the human component of that. It is really so, and it's somehow captured in the phrase that it is important to have right people at the right place and at the right time. And this may, of course, change during the life cycle of the infrastructure. It is also important, and it came several times in the contributions of Jana or others, that we are in need to harmonize our understanding of the science we are supporting, of the services we are providing, and this gives us the possibility to improve. And I mean, we are not doing that just for sake of science, but also we want to demonstrate that there is some benefits to the society. And I mean, again, this exposome project is a clear demonstration how science directly impacts the well-being in the society. And while analyzing the landscape of research infrastructures in Europe, we have concluded that research infrastructures really start to play an increasing role impacting economy, impacting sectorial policies, and not only supporting the European, let's say, research agendas, but having really becoming or are becoming a critical element in different sectorial policies. And again, this is related to the things we are discussing here, because we have seen, and it's very well documented in the landscaping document Jose Luis was presenting yesterday, that there is an overlap between research infrastructure services in the different scientific domains, that, as Jana also pointed out, environment is intrinsically connected to health, but also to energy issues, and there are also links to social sciences, humanities, and others. Thus, the sustainability, for the sustainability, it is really pivotal that we are securing a holistic picture to the infrastructure services and are capable to provide solutions how to organize the things. And this brings me to the other paper, which we have, let's say, constructed, designed, developed in very long discussions over several years. And the paper is called Making Science Happen, New Ambition for Research Infrastructures in the European Research Area, which is a policy concept that easily can be extended to the global concept. And again, over 30 policy recommendations collected in this paper. I have selected just few of them, which create a kind of argumentation framework supporting the endeavor we are here starting to discuss. This report, as said, creates the basis for policy considerations, advocating that research infrastructures are not only strategic investments that influence research, but have huge impact on societal well-being, on economic sustainability, societal growth, and impacts many other areas. And that a holistic view of an integrated global ecosystem of research infrastructures is really fundamental for efficient implementation of different policies, not only in research. One could continue in similar ways arguing, but what I wanted to highlight here is that despite of all these, let's say, political statements, policy considerations, the science still stays in front. And there is also clear added value for this integrated approach where one cross-disciplinary connects several research infrastructures to provide better science, better services to sciences. And this added value came in several contributions in this conference and is finally also mentioned in the few bullet points over there. The added value of harmonization of services, harmonization of let's say, cultural understanding of science really impacts the way how effective services of research infrastructures can be provided. And we in ICRI are still working on this concept because, and this is the last point over there, because the COVID outbreak somehow interrupted our considerations in this area, and we have been somehow kept busy with other things and have lost a little bit momentum in, let's say, organizing ourselves in further elaborating on the global research infrastructure concept, and this will come at a later stage now. And Jose Luis has already yesterday indicated that we are going to continue this effort. By that, I am closing, and thank you for listening.
Come back, Jan. We're on the stage now for discussion time. So I'm going to have a two-part question and have each of our participants pick one or the other. What are the major technological gaps for exposomics? And the second part is, what are the opportunities for engaging other countries, including those lower middle-income countries, into this exposomics framework? Jana, you have the mic, and you look like you're turning it on, so I'll let you go first.
Does it work?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You asked about technology gaps. Mm-hmm. I think we need to be able to measure both the chemical exposures and their impacts, hopefully using the same technology in a comprehensive way. We do have mass spec technologies. We can do some targeted work very precisely, very expensively. We need to push the limits of those technologies to do it better, cheaper, and to be able to upscale it. Another challenge is the data, but it has been said already. The opportunities I see for the industry, for the policymakers, for the societies, there is a lot of opportunity for the citizen science, because we need to pay back to the communities and individuals who are willing to get engaged in our research and provide them some feedback and additional information.
Okay. Others, thoughts, comments about including others or gaps?
Just a very short remark, because for me and in the ignorance I am presenting here my opinions, a big challenge is to align an adequate framework in which this entire research infrastructure can operate. Because even in Europe, we see such a huge diversity of national approaches, different legal and accounting systems that in principle prevents collaboration at such a scale. And when we transpose that to a global structure, then the challenges are even higher. So one has, along developing, let's say, the harmonization of scientific concepts, work also on the harmonization of workable governance models.
Okay, and I think that's an advantage of being at this meeting, is hearing how other organizations have overcome some of those challenges, if not all of them. Others, Carthage.
Yeah, just on the engaging other countries,
I think it's fundamental. It's really critical to do it now from the start. I mean, the reality is that there are, the Western countries have a strong science capacity, and there are countries that have very little. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be involved from the outset in the discussions, and that their needs aren't taken into account. As we've heard with Australia, the issues are very different to other countries. So it's also about what is the value proposition for these different countries. And I think for many, it's maybe not the science, this is a public health issue, and that's maybe a different way. You have to think in that political way. How do we sell this, as I say, via WHO or whatever? But it has to be sold perhaps more that way, and perhaps that way also is the way to get some funding in those countries to support this. So even recognizing, you can do it quicker if you do it in Europe and the US and a few other Western countries. But there's also, at the same time, you've really got to bring everyone else along with you rather than do it and then go to them and sell it to them afterwards.
Okay. Others? Comments? I think there is this opportunity when we look at other countries who have not yet been engaged, is really finding out what their needs and interests are, right? I mean, like, we can't thrust upon them what we think their needs are. And I think it's something where we've worked with several groups in Africa, and different countries have different desires. Some want to build up their laboratory technical capabilities. Others just want the information about what those exposures are. And I think it's fine just figuring out what those needs are and helping them do that as much as possible. Jana?
I checked the audience last night, and I think we have representatives of many other regions that are outside Europe and the US, and we would be very happy to hear your feedback, how you want to be involved, because this morning we had a discussion on how to get the societies involved in a non-formal way. One thing is building the infrastructure here and there, but then we should have some kind of informal panel. And we really have to brainstorm about how to establish it and who should be running it, supporting it. But we really need to work together to raise awareness and have the multiple communities involved. So I will be happy to hear if there is any suggestion from the audience.
Take advantage of your app. If you have comments for us, you can message on that app for the program too, even after this meeting. So if you have any suggestions or comments or whatever it would be, we'd love to hear that. Any questions from the audience, anybody? Do I see any hands?
Do you
have a mic? Wait, she's got it.
I'll just respond to that invitation. Simon Hodson, co-data. We're partners in a project, a Wellcome Trust funded project called Data Science Without Borders, which is run by the African Population Health Research Center, and has the other ACDC as one of the partners, the African Center for Disease Control. And that is taking an exposome approach and is trying to look at, I think in a less comprehensive way, but nevertheless is trying to look at environmental factors in a number of diseases, both transmissible and non-transmissible. The co-data role is on the data harmonization, data integration, and the use of standards, but we'd like to take up that opportunity to engage. We've been working with some of the nanomaterials people in Park as well as part of the World Fair project, and have done some work with them on data harmonization, use of standards as well. So perhaps that can be a link to pick up on that invitation between a project in Africa and the work that you're doing.
Okay, yeah, definitely like to talk about that more. I see we're at time. I don't know if we're being kicked out. It's 2:56, and I think they need to change rooms. If I don't see any other questions, I want to thank all the audience and participants for being here, and we'd love to talk more afterwards out in the hallway during the break time. So if you have any thoughts or comments, please seek us out. So thank you very much.